Little Tree, Grandma and Grandpa pick Indian violets, from which Grandma make a tonic. They also gather evergreen needle in the winter, which Grandma steep in hot water for them to drink. In addition, they gather a corn, which Grandma grind up and make into a corn fritter. Occasionally, Grandma will accidentally spill some sugar into the acorn meal, and then Little Tree get an extra acorn fritter. Both Grandpa and Little T like acorn fritter really well. They gather dandelion for greens. The dandelions are mixed with other greens, such as a nettle, which sting when you pick them, but which make good greens. Often, Grandpa and Little Tree fail unnoticed and nettle packed, but Grandma was real good at fighting them. Like other things, greens have their good and bad point. Grandpa said he had over know about anything in life that, being pleasurable, didn't have a damn catch to it somewhere which it lies. Cherokee philosophy, religion in this chapter. The earth is a mother called Man Allah. The earth brings to birth all life that it found on her. The earth also clear away in dead wood as needed. Indian is their way for living with nature. The white farmer gather out of their garden in last summer, but the Indian gather from the early spring, when the first green starts glowing, all through the summer and fall, gathering acorn and nuts. Grandpa said the wood would feed you if you live with the wood instead of tearing them up. The Indians are also what we call superstitious. They believe in birds' eye, and did the ancient Greeks, different birds have different meanings. For example, a red cardinal means that money will come to you. Birds can also be funny. They can overeat live cherries and become drunk. Indians never fish for sport, they fish for food. Grandpa said it was the silliest damn thing in the world to go around killing for sport. My friend Hallie Thomas, a Winnebago Indian who lived for many years on the Appalachian Trail, once killed a large fish by dropping a rock on it. He ate the fish. While Little Tree is hunting, fishing, a rattlesnake attempted to bite him. Grandpa put his hand between the rattlesnake and Little Tree's face, knowing that the rattlesnake will bite Little Tree's face. If Grandpa moves his hand, Grandpa is willing to be bitten in the place of Little Tree. After startling the rattlesnake, Grandpa say, "Hell damn fire!" And we showed that son of bitch, didn't we? But Little Tree admit that he himself didn't have anything to do with the showing. Fortunately, Grandpa's knowledge is able to save Grandma's life. After a bad night, he is okay but weak. In the morning, fortunately, Grandpa is okay again soon. At first, Little Tree blamed himself for not being more alert, but Grandma said that the accident was nobody's fault, not even the rattlesnakes. She said we was not to play fault on anything that just happened, which made me feel some better, but not much. That night by the creek, through the night, his mind taken him back, and he was a boy again. Grandpa was 9 years old in 1867. The land was occupied by Union soldiers and run by politicians, so didn't venture out of the mountain hardly and Yato. Grandpa ran errands to the settlement when it was needed, for nobody paid any attention to the Indian boy. It was on one of his ramblings that Grandpa found the little valley. It was deep between high mountains and grown up with weeds and bushes, and tangled over with vines. Grandpa paid no attention to the house. Then he commented to see life around it. There was a chicken on the place, like most white people had, of the cow for milking, nor a mill for plowing. There was not anything except some broke down farming tools laying aside an old barn. The old bagman was staggering along, trying to hold up plow stock. That when Grandpa saw the Union soldier, he kept his eye on them. There was a dozen men in the patrol, all on horseback. A big man with stripe of yellow on his arm was leading them, and they were stopped back in the pine grove, watching the plowing too. He figured out the Union soldier with the yellow strip was up to meanness, and he said to me he wouldn't warn the people in the old house that they was being watched. Next morning, he set himself to do just that. He got to his hiding place, but Grandpa was shy of people. He waited trying to figure how to go about it. They was out in the field. He had about decided he would live out in the field. Hollow what he wanted to tell them, but he was too late. He saw the Union sold horse but a mule. It was a worth-looking mule Grandpa had ever seen. Just as he got to the edge of the wood, the soldier stabbed the old mule with a whip, and it taken out across the field. The soldier stayed back in the wood on his horse. On the morning of the fourth day, Grandpa saw the Union soldier drop a white sack at the end of the field. It was a sack of seed corn. He was talking with the one-legged man and the old bagman. Aladdin wished the Union soldier was plowing the old mule. He had the plowing line tied a loop around his neck. Turned out, he was a surgeon, and he was a farmer for Illinois. He brought a little bush with him. They were apple tree. The two little girls take to helping him, and in a month time he had completely ring of field with apple tree. Turned out he was from New York and come from apple tree raising and his trade. By the time he had the entire valley planted in corn. Represented the politician. They planted a pole in the yard, and on top of the pole they put a red flag. Grandpa knew what the red flag meant. He had seen it around in the settlement. It means some politician wanted your property, and so they raised the tax on it high enough that you couldn't pay it. Then they put up the red flag, meaning they was going to take it over. The one-legged man, the women, the old black man, and the young uns all come but off the field with their horses. When they saw the regulator, they bunched up in the yard. The one-legged man shot up his musket and hit a regulator, and the regulator commenced firing their gun. They killed the one-legged man. Grandpa saw the old bagman run at the regulator with his whole raised up in the air. They shot him 2 or 3 times, and he fell, laying over his whole handle. A rich man took over the valley. Grandpa never knew what happened to the women and the young uns. The rich man brought it sharecropper, the land and weather being as it is. You can't raise apple in the big enough bunches to make real money. So they plow up the apple tree. Word was passed that private from New York deserted the army. He was spotted and the coward running out on the pursuing at all. Grandpa said, the boss the surgeon up to send his remains and he set back to Illinois. The Indian brought something to trade and laid it at the white man's feet. If he saw nothing he wanted, he picked up, he wear and walked off. The white man, not understanding, called him an Indian giver, meaning one who gives and then take back. This is not so. If the Indian give a gift, he will make no care. Grandpa said the Indian held his palm up to show peace, that they held no weapon. This was logical to Grandpa, but seemed funny as hell to everybody else. Grandpa said white man mean the same thing by shaking hand, except his word was so crooked. He had to try to shake a weapon out of the sleeve of the fellow who claimed he was a friend. Grandpa was not given much to handshaking, as he said he didn't like for a man to try to shake something out of his sleeve after he had presented himself as a friend. It was total distrustful of a man's word, which is reasonable, as to flock saying, "How?" and then laughing when they see an Indian. Grandpa said people laughing at that was laughing at an Indian who was trying to be a courteous and considerate. We had delivered our ware to the crossroads store, and Mr. Jenkins said two big city men had been there. He said they was from Chattanooga and drove a long black automobile. Mr. Jenkins said they wanted to talk to Grandpa, said they were in the whiskey trade, said they heard tell you was a good marker, and they wanted to put you in a big stew, and that you could get rich working for them. When we got to the cabin, Grandpa told Grandma about the big city men. He said, "You stay here, little tree." I sat on the front part watching for the big city men. Grandpa had not hardly gone from sight when I saw them and told Grandma. Grandma stayed back standing in the dogtrot, and we watched them coming up the trail and across the footlock. He looked at the grandma. "We want to see the old man," he said. I figured he was sick, for the breathing was bad. "Look at me, sitting on the chair. The boy looked like a breed," he said. "Maybe he understands English. Do you understand English, boy?" I said. Mr. Shank wanted to know where Grandpa was, and I pointed back up the trail. He reached in his pocket and took out of a whole dollar and held it toward me. "You can have this dollar, boy, if you take us to your grandpa." I felt pretty good about the whole thing, leading them up to the trail, but as we walked, I commenced to think I could take them to the stew. I led them up to High Trail. It took them a long time. When they finally came over the top of the mountain, Mr. Shank had his arm over Mr. Slick's shoulder. He had hurt his foot, more than likely, for he was limping and hopping pretty bad. It was getting dark. Grandpa stood up and cupped his hand around his mouth. "Woo!" Grandpa hollered down the mountain. The sound bounced off another mountain, as plain as if Grandpa had been over there. Then it bowed into the cleft. There was not any way of figuring where the sound had come from. The echo had barely died away when we heard 3 gunshots from down in the cleft. The sound bounced around and traveled off. Me and Grandpa woke at dawn. Me and Grandpa, but Blue Boy too, watched it. The sky was a light gray. Above the rim of the farthest mountain, a pink stick with a cord, morning white pickup, and hit our face. The sun cleared the mountain, and the float fell in the sky. And Grandpa sighed and straight. He said, "You throw down to the cabin and tell Grandma. Well, up here a while. tell her to fix you and me something to eat and put it in a paper sack, and feed them to big city fellas something to eat and put it into a tow sack. I said I start off. When I got to the cabin clearing, I told her grandpa wanted something to eat in a paper sack for me and him, and for Mr. Shank and Mr. Slick, something to be put in a tow sack. Grandma commented to cook up the victuals he had fixed mine and grandpa's, and was boiled fit for Mr. Shank and Mr. Slick. Grandma put the fish for the big city fella in the tow sack, and I set off up the high trail. Grandma turned all the holdout, and they went with me. When I got to the top of the mountain, we sat down under persimmon bushes to eat our dinner. After they finished eating, it was late sun by the time me and Grandpa got to the cabin. We sat on the back porch with Grandma and waited for Mr. Shank and Mr. Slick to come along. It was 2 hours later and dusk dark when they made it off the clearing. They made a wide circle around the cabin, which surprised me, as I figured they wanted to see Grandpa, but they had changed their mind. I asked Grandpa about keeping my dollars. He said I could, as I had done my part of the job. It was not my fault if they changed their mind, which is reasonable. Grandpa said he reckoned it all come about from the misunderstanding on Mr. Shank and Mr. Slick part regarding me and Grandpa working for them in the whiskey tent. I figured more than like it was too. Planting is busy time. Grandpa would touch the ground by his finger. Grandpa, I feel it won't. We were not going to the planting, Grandpa said. Reality, there is a sign for everything. So there are times when you can plant, such as turnip or tether, just have to be planted in the dark by the moon. Anything that grows above ground, such as beans, peas, must be planted in the light of the moon. Grandpa studied the star, wind, and bird for planting beans. We might be all set to do some planting, going by the star the night before. But right off, we would see the wind was not right or the birds, or it could be too wet or too dry, so we would have to go fishing instead. Grandma, I suspicion some of the sign had to do with Grandpa fishing feeling, Grandma said. Grandpa, when the day was just right, we planted corn mostly. That was our money crop in the whiskey tent. Grandpa laid off the row with the plow. Me and Grandma dropped the seed in the row and covered them up. On the side of the mountain, Grandma planted the corn with a Cherokee planting stick. We planted lots of the things: beans, okra, tather, turnip, and peas. We planted the peas around the front of the patch near the wood. This attracts deer in the fall. Deer are crazy about pea and will come. So we always got an easy deal for winter meat. We also plant watermelon pretty heavy. Grandpa said we could always turn to the crossroads store and more than likely make a lot of money selling them. Little tree, I shake on the watermelon fairly heavy when I am certain that the watermelon lived. They are not. Several times at the supper table, I told Grandpa that I suspicion I had found. Show Grandpa. The watermelon is what drug in and big so. Me and Grandpa study it. If you thumb it and it sound think it is total green, and if it sound tank is coming on And if it's called tunk, then you have got the right watermelon. But this watermelon, but it's what a border like it, Grandpa said. The sound was somewhere between a think or tunk. Little tree, there was another way we could check it out, and the broom said straw. If you lay broom said straw crosswise on the watermelon, and it was just lay there, the watermelon is green. But if its broom said straw turned from crosswise is lengthwise, then you have got a ripe watermelon. We said watching it. Grandpa was ready to give up on it, but I was not. Grandpa said, if we let it lay until the sun was straight overhead, about dinner time, then we could pick it from the vine. Little Tree said, I kept a close check on the sun. We reached the end of the road and there was Grandma. She grunted, dinner time, she said. Me and Grandpa broke into the run for the watermelon patch. And now would depend on me to learn him about the dark situation. Little T said, now I was sick. That reminded Grandma time was passing. Grandpa carried it into the spring branch and let me roll in the spot. He carried it, me and Grandma following, in the shade of the great elm. There we sat around in the circle. Grandpa cut the slide. Grandma and him laughed at his juice run down my mouth and over my shirt. It was my first watermelon. It was my season, my birthday being in the summer. It is the costume. During your season, to be told your own birthday, of your father doing, of your mother glove. Grandma said, I was lucky, and more than likely 1 in 100 million. Grandma said, I was born from nature of Mount Ola, and so had all the brother and sister of which he has sung my first night in the mountain. That is very few pick to have the total love of three. The birds, the water, the rain, and the wind. Little T. We sat on the back porch in the dusk of the summer evening. Grandma talked soft and she looked sad. I told her I was right proud of the whole thing and right off. Grandpa said, I had always been hampered with a suspicion of frightened of the dark, and now would depend on me to learn him about the dark situation. Little T said, now I was sick. That reminded Grandma time was passing. Pie Billy said, I figured the world was coming to the end or was rumor of war and famine has set on the land out of Oklahoma. Little Tree said, we knew about the Grandma wrote to our king in the nation. Pie Billy played in the dusk evening, but his music was sad. It made I feel like this was the last summer. We went to church every Sunday. Grandpa put on his black suit and mule sack shirt with his black shoes, and Grandma held the dress. It was orange and glowed like a spring flower floating down on the tail. Me and Grandma wore moccasin. I was proud of how Grandma looked. Grandpa said, the preacher and the deacon pretty much had a chokehold on religion, and they done of determining on who was going hell or who was not. When we walked into the church clearing, Grandma stopped to talk with some women, but me and Grandpa headed straight for Willow John. He always stood back in the tree. He was older than Grandpa, but he was tall, full, shaggy with white plaited hair hanging below his shoulders, and the flat brim hat flew low to his eye. Willow John was over 80. Grandpa said long ago Willow John had gone to the nation. He had walked the mountain and would not ride in a car or train. He was gone 3 years and come back, but he would not talk of it. He would only say there was no nation. Grandpa and Willow John held each other for a long time, and they didn't say anything. Then Grandma would come. The Willow John would hold each other for a long time. Little Tree said, I told him I was going to be a Cherokee. Willow John touched my shoulder, and his eyes showed a far back twinkle. We always sat on the back row in the church. Once after we taking our seat, I found a long knife lying where I sit. Grandma said, Willow John gave it to me. That is the way Indians give gifts. You would not get the gift if you didn't deserve it. I gave Willow John a nickel and a bullfrog. The Sunday I brought it, Willow John hung his coat on a tree. Willow John put on his coat and went into church. When the preacher said, Lord, the bullfrog said, Lord, deep and loud. Everybody ran and jumped. Someone said, God Almighty, and said, Praise the Lord. Willow John reached his hand in his pocket. Then he looked at me and smiled, and he laughed and cried. That made everybody look at him. I was scared, but I laughed too. The preacher tried once before to preach a sermon regarding Willow John, but he never paid him any attention. Willow John would not bow his head for prayer, and he would not take off his hat. So I thought on it over the year. His people were broken and lost scattered from this mountain. That was their home and lived upon preacher, and after that in the church. He could not fight, and so he wore his hat. Maybe the frog was answering for him. It broke some of the bitterness, so he cried. Every Sunday after church, we went into the tree near the clearing and spread our dinner. Willow John always brought game in the sack. Grandma brought cornbread and vegetable fixings. We ate there in the shade of the big elm and talked. After that, as the sun titled and hissed the afternoon that it's time to leave, Grandma and Grandpa hugged Willow John, and he touched my shoulder with his hand and sighed. I would turn to watch Willow John, and he never looked back. Grandpa criticized preachers as being stuck up sometimes, as if they and not God decide who get into heaven. At the small church, the family attend many kinds of Protestant because the area is not sparsely populated. Not every denomination can have its own church. Some people believe in baptism by sprinkling, while others believe in total immersion. Some think you should call the preacher reverend, while others think you should not. Both sides use the Bible to prove that their way is the best way, and that anyone who does it in the other way is in danger of damnation. The preacher does not seem to be very good. There is only one rich family in the parish, the family that puts $1 in the collection plate every Sunday, and the preacher calls it up to that rich family. He opens the car door for them, and when he pitches and make a point, he says, "Ain't that right, Mr. Johnson?" Of course, it doesn't matter whether Mr. Johnson thinks it is right. It matters only whether God knows it is right. Grandpa is near when it comes to church. He hears the preacher carry on about the papacy and the Palestine, and Grandpa thinks they are alive. He doesn't like it when the preacher said that Grandpa knows what the papacy are up to, as if Grandpa has had dealing with the papacy. This caused Grandpa to look hard at the preacher. There are some good things and some bad things about the church. In the church, there will be a confession of sin. Sometimes a person will be confessed that he has done something bad to a fellow. but the fellow didn't know anything about it previous to hearing in the church. This caught hard feeling. Once a woman stand out and say that he guilty of fornicating, and a man yelled, "Tell it all." The woman then told a story. She wanted to confess all of her sins. A good thing about the church is charity. At the church, people publicly identify other people who need help. Everybody pitched in to help. After that, grandfather taught little tree that if you show a fellow how to do, it's what a lot better than giving him something. He said if you learn a man of make himself, then he would be alright. But if you just give him something and didn't learn him anything, then you would be continually giving to the man and the rest of your natural life. Grandpa said you would be doing a man disservice, for if he became dependent on you, you had taken away his character and had stolen it from him.
Theme of A Little Tree. A little tree learns about how his Cherokee family lives and survives in the forest. Whether how to planting, battle of Cherokee with soldiers, accepting religion and instance of one ethnicity. Another important thing that is love of grandma and grandpa care for a little tree, and he also appreciates of his Cherokee family.